So today I thought we'd do something different. Right, let's see if I pop up this time. Is it gonna work? Let's see. Okay, it worked. Whew. That's hype. So I thought what we would do is we talk about this. Psychology and fighting game. Psychology in most things obviously is like one of the more important, it's one of the more important aspects of life in general, right? Like understanding like how you do things, how you interpret things. Like this is obvious. Well, it's like obvious, but like you don't actively think about it like that. You know what I mean? Like it's not so cut and dry in that way. I've specifically learned a lot about psychology. I've studied it to a decent degree. I actually wanted to be a therapist when I was younger. Fighting games especially taught me I don't think I could be much of a therapist. But like, I'm not going to talk about like, obviously, again, I'm not a psychologist or anything of the sort. It's just, this is stuff I think about and I'll explain my reasoning and I'll explain what gets me to these concepts, what gets me to this reasoning. Fighting game therapy. So let's talk about like this discussion we always discuss is taking ownership of your actions, right? And this isn't just like a fighting game thing, this is a life thing. Taking ownership of your decisions, your actions. This is not just something relevant in fighting games, it's relevant in your life as a whole. I'll explain the concept and how this kind of works. So let's talk about this as a basic concept, right? Let's talk about it right here. So taking ownership of your actions, right? Let's talk about it in the sense of a fighting game. So when it comes to basic psychology in this way, in more explosive fighting games, we can most definitely see there are really strong players who are consistent despite how explosive some games are. Like, I'm not familiar with Skullgirls, but that looks like a pretty tense, explosive game, right? Not in the sense of like it's like random, but it's like, you know, you can just die, right? I guess that's like basically the idea in Skullgirls. Games like Dragon Ball or like older Guilty Gears especially, these are situations where you can just basically implode, but there's a reason why players are consistent, right? Despite how random you may think like these sort of games are, how because they're damaged, because of the situations that form up, there is an aspect that allows them to be consistent, right? And I'll show you, this is, in my opinion, as a fighting game player, you know, or a fighting game pro, as they would say, as I've been referred to on PlayStation.com. There is something very, very important to digest when it comes to playing fighting games. One thing that helps a lot is taking ownership of your decisions, right? And you may wonder, like, what entirely does that mean? So I'm gonna give you actually the best example I know from Strive. I think that's the Strive has the best one in Nago. Nago is the psychology killer. Basically, so here's a good example. I'm gonna give you this perspective of a close range character versus a long range one, right? So like, let's say Nago he's got long range, right? Nago long range boy. If you, like, let's say, try to commit by, like, just doing Grand Viper all the time, right? Let's say Soul does Grand Viper 100 times and dies. This is a common situation. 10 times, dies 9 times out of 10. Soul player says, this character is broken, I can't fight him. Now, when you choose this option, it doesn't matter which option you choose, but when you choose an option, you are choosing it no matter what. Like this, again, this is straightforward. You are making a decision. You are acting on that decision. It is you. You did it. You did this. You did this. You did this. If you are choosing this decision because you feel obligated to because of a character strength, whatever reason, like maybe like you think, oh well, it's hard to get in, so if I commit to something like Vortex, here's a common one a lot of people will do. Here's the common OS. X character. Oh shit, it actually does an X. That's crazy. It's so broken. I have to do it. This is something here people say so much. Like, there is no amount of decision making that forces you to take terrible risks. Let me give you an example. We're gonna go back. We're gonna go back. So I'm gonna give you an example. So Johnny, and this is Soul vs. Johnny is actually very similar to what we're discussing here. Johnny made people feel very, very similarly to how Nago was. Especially Johnny taught me, because I had the same mentality. I did this. Right, I didn't do this word for word, but this is similar to the concept that I thought about. But I realized inherently by doing this, you are going to be inconsistent, right? Like just even by choosing a bad gamble. So like if we're talking about like how you commit, right? Like let's say if you just like gamble all the time, you just do stupid shit because you're like, the matchup's so bad, I gotta do it. Number one, you don't have to. That is your decision, right? You are deciding to make that. So you know what I learned watching stronger players is I thought, well, what makes them so consistent and makes me so inconsistent? And the answer is they did not choose to commit in like wild fashions. What they did was they actually tend to slow down more. So whereas I would typically like, let's say I would choose a very gamble heavy option consistently, strong players would choose to commit significantly less. Again, this sounds obvious, right? This sounds very obvious. But what do you think significantly less here means? So pick a safer option. Picking a safer option is kind of vague, but you're right. Let's watch this. So against Johnny, he can constantly threaten things, right? Like especially with meter, he can constantly threaten things with his RCs. So he has coins, he has 25 meter. These are all threats that you can die from, right? No matter what. Now, because of this, one thing I specifically learned, by over-respecting, more often than not, you will be more consistent than not. Basically, I still did something committal here. I still tried to instant block. Even at the end, I tried to plus Fire Slash, right? Specifically here, I did Riot Stomp because I expected him to do TD. This is a big committal option as well. But see, he did nothing in all these interactions. He did not extend himself at all. But this interaction is important to understand because even though I'm blocking and you may think like, oh, look at the risk, you're gonna die. The reason why I died here was because I still chose an option. I tried to instant block. By the way, if you don't know, if you have flashing risk in older Guilty Gears, it's an automatic counter hit. You can see that each move is a counter hit there. Even in this situation, trying to instant block was a committal option because, I mean, I had so much risk, right? Now, you may think that's bullshit. You may think that is some bullshit, that's not even really that committal, right? You may think that. But Johnny is one of the better examples of a character that forces these like sort of situations to like even smaller ones like that, it becomes a gamble, right? It becomes a situation where even something like that can kill you. In all these situations, KB just chose safe options that were guaranteed, and I died. Basically, this is a good example of like, when it comes to choosing strong committing, there's no bar for how defensive you can be. Typically, bad defensive play equals you defend with no purpose. This is the same with bad neutral equal you approach with no purpose. This means a lot of the time you end up playing like, if I say you should play slower, right? A lot of people just assume, oh, I'll walk forward, I'll dash forward, or something like that, right? But like they don't have an idea. They don't really know what they're looking for. And this is important to note because like, one, you won't know what to look for when you're new. But here's the problem. A lot of people do this. You do shit with no purpose, trying to learn. You die. You say, this shit sucks. This is painfully common. This is so fucking common. I cannot overstate it. But basically, like a lot of people, this is kind of what I'm discussing. It is like, you don't realize is that you may just think this shit sucks rather than actually practicing, right? Rather than trying to more. Just because you have a bad set against one person doesn't mean like, you know, your strategy is invalid. Maybe you need to play someone that, you know, approaches it differently. Maybe you need to play someone that has a strategy that, you know, maybe they're not as good as adapting. Honestly, sometimes when you're learning and you're doing these things, playing against someone with a less stable game plan is usually how you get used to it. I'm going to literally write out what they're doing, right? Top player says, play slower. You play slower without an idea on what to do. You die, complain, expecting a top player not to adjust to how you're playing. Right, this is the meme, right? I can tell you how to beat something, but it doesn't mean I'm going to sit there and let you keep beating it. And this is sometimes like, it's very good for players who are very typically RPS heavy, or like maybe don't approach things or aren't thinking as thoroughly about their strategies. So this is kind of what I mean. We're all dialing back into this, but it's all about taking ownership of your decisions, right? So what about the noob that never gambles? See, this is a good question. So if you never commit, you are predictable. You are predictable, you die. See, like this lines up again, right? You always gamble, you are equals, you are predictable, you die. This is why I'm talking about do shit with a purpose, right? This is like an entirely different subject that we can talk about. By committing to a gamble, you accept the situation that follows if you are wrong. This is something nobody fucking does. Like, very few people own up to this shit. Like, let's say you are Kai. You cannot resist your primal urge to dash up throw against Soul. He far slashes you, you get counter hit and sent to the corner, next hit kills you. So like, this is kind of what I mean. When you commit to this primal urge here to dash up throw, it's not just, you know, he uses fire slash, you get counter hit, you get sent to the corner, which is a win condition, and it creates this situation, right? Again, here's something I see a lot. Soul is broken. Imbalanced game. A lot of people, I'm gonna say it, bad players love to commit to shit, do something wrong, lean into their win condition. You die, you complain about the character. Now let's talk about viewing it objectively versus this, right? So let's say if you listen to a lot of strong players, you may think, oh, they cope a lot, right? Like LK is like a great example. So many people love to be like, I told LK a year ago that Millia sucked, and now he's saying that Millia is not that good, right? So the reason why LK will say this is because he thinks about it in this way. A lot of people who just complain about Millia do this shit, right? By accepting, taking ownership of your action, you can create, we're gonna call it mini strategy. We call these micro decisions, but we can call it mini strategies, right? Focusing more on movements, positioning, strategies, right? These are how like a lot of really good players, by taking ownership of your actions, basically like it enables you to focus more on these sort of things. This is something that usually comes from your ego, right? Now I'm gonna spit here. I'm gonna do a little bit of psychology spin. And I said this before. Acknowledging you're bad is not what makes you bad. Refusing to acknowledge you are bad is what makes you bad. Acknowledging a problem or a flaw for yourself, you get to proceed with focusing on it. Refusing to acknowledge a problem or flaw for yourself, you do not proceed with improving it. It's very basic. I'm gonna give you some examples that may kind of hit you. You think you're ill, you go get it checked out. You don't think you're ill, you don't go get it checked out. You get it checked out, you can get cured. Right? This is basically like what you're doing. This is your psychology. This is your brain. What do you do if you don't know how to assess what is wrong or even what questions to ask to improve? Gameplay is obviously how. It's a nature of like looking at where you die, where you get hit. Don't be afraid to ask for people's opinions on what you could do better. Again, this is why I always, like when I play, I always like, wait, they could do this better. I think this is bad. I think they can work on this. These sort of strategies are very important to figure out. You know what I mean? Talking to people is scary, but you have to remember a lot of people, especially in streams, like they want to help you. Like my goal is not to, this is basically my job at this point. The goal is I want to help people improve so they can beat me. And if they beat me, then there's stuff I can learn. And if I learn from that, then we're all getting better and the skill level goes up and everyone is getting stronger. You know what I mean? A lot of people assume that losing equals you are washed up. Winning equals you are progressing. This is basically how a lot of people think. And like, again, in fighting, it's kind of a problem because there's no feedback besides these two things, right? It's either you lose or you win. Until you get to a certain point, you basically won't have a better understanding of this bubble until you can really digest everything that's happening or how your opponent's playing. If you're adapting a lot, you will understand where your progress and where your strategies are, you know, coming in handy. But the problem is, like, you can't get to this point. And in fact, this is something I want to add in. No matter how bad you recognize your mentality is, and no matter how fast you want to improve it, you cannot fix things in one day. It takes time. Don't beat yourself up for thinking one way or the other. Just try your best to keep improving. This is the key thing. Just keep improving. And this is why this is a problem. Like, your progress is entirely legitimized by your wins or losses, then it becomes you are not trying to improve, you're just trying to win. And if there's a big difference between just trying to win and trying to improve. There's a massive difference. You can win by doing like Hamshire, right? This is why like a lot of people, like that example I was talking about earlier, let's say when it comes to like Naga vs Soul, you may think, oh, I just gamble and like the character's broken, so if I win, then I'm playing good, but if I'm wrong, then like that's just the character. It doesn't work like that. People will blame the character if they lose, but credit themselves if they win, right? This is ego alert. Like, can I get emojis in this? Ego. Why this matters? Why does all of this matter? Right? Here's a typical progression. What's it like? I don't want to say schedule, but like route. Like here in like a visual novel, you play versus your demon character. I think calling him a demon character is a good idea. You know, you have a preconceived notion of how it should go already, despite inconsistent success. You excuse losses as this character broke, or my character poopy poo poo. This is the end of your progression, right? You can only learn to play your character better. This game, bad brain, dumb, stupid, exactly. You take ownership of your actions. Typical progression now. You play versus your demon character. You study the interactions. You go from there. It enables you, despite wins or losses, to figure out more strategies and experiment further. Now this already will make a better fighting game character, or player, not a character, but a better player, right? Because if you are willing to figure out strategies and experiment, a lot of people ask how I can like, you know, learn characters or execute characters like properly. It's because I've studied so much and I've done so much shit that like, you know, when a new character comes out, I'm really good at picking them up fast because I've done this a lot, right? I'm not like fucking Da Vinci or something, though I like Fate Grand Order Da Vinci on my glasses. What? But basically, like, this alone, right? Again, and this all stems from ego, right? I had an ex-girlfriend quite a few years ago who, she and like a bunch of friends of ours would play Soul Calibur. I don't really know much about Soul Calibur, but we'd play Soul Calibur. They would get angry if you studied, if you looked up combos, right? Like that's what we're talking about. We're like talking about like the pipeline between like casuals and like actually like competing seriously. Like this can come from that, right? Like maybe like you think like, oh, like you know, mashing with your friends, you're just naturally better. Maybe you care the most. Maybe you play like a character that's, you know, directly approachable. I mean, if you have a friend that plays, when you get past that point and you've attached your ego as like, I'm the, you know, the top fighting game player as of my friend group, whatever, you can get an ego, and then you may realize like, oh, you know, like big fish in a small pond sort of type of strategy, right? You may end up here, and then that makes this a lot harder to digest. It's hard no matter what if you think you're good, but you actually fucking suck, right? No matter what. That's not something to look down on. I feel like a lot of people tend to do that. They may think like, oh, like this, like, you know, I feel like I should be doing better. I've put so much time into it. It doesn't matter how much time you put into it. And I mean, if you do care about that, you want to be realistic with your perspective, right? That aspect is important if you actually care about getting better. Because a lot of people will be like, oh, I put so much time into the game, right? People think time equals success. They do badly, or they do poorly, let's say. Because time does not equal success. They get mad. You are not entitled to success through anything. But yeah, like you get the point, right? These are hard things to swallow, right? No matter what, like this is why I use the ill analogy. At the end of the day, the world will not change for you, but you can change yourself for the world. That sounds like a motivational speech. This is why complaining about characters or like asking for nerfs all the time fucking sucks. Because like I can tell you as an Exerd player, you know, when Elphelt released in Sign, we thought, oh, she's so broken, she's just gonna get nerfed. I can tell you, after 4 years, they did not nerf her past 5th. They did not nerf her out of top 5 for 5 years. So like, we complained. This is why I want you to understand how it felt for me, right? As a young fighting gamer, that I was like, oh, they'll hear us, they'll nerf Alpha. That shit did not happen. This is why I say don't trust Arxis, right? A lot of people, we're gonna put this in brackets too, so you know it's fucking serious. This is the serious ego one. A lot of people do not want to ask for help or steal tech or get strategies because, one, they may feel like it invalidates them as a player or makes it look like they're inferior. Question marks. Why does this matter? This does not matter. This is why I don't try to, basically, like, they may think, like, you know, again, this is all just ego. Why does it matter if, like, you know, you use someone else's info, if you use someone else's ideas? There's nothing wrong with asking someone for a strategy. You know what I mean? Like, some of the best players I know will just ask me questions about how something works. You know, Kizzy asked me to discuss the Happy Chaos matchup with him, like this weekend, right? Like just like that. And Happy Chaos is a great example, because if you don't ask for help on him, he fucking kills you, right? And he'll never learn what to do better. It's a full stop. It is not about propping yourself up to be this like undefeatable, impossible, like it doesn't matter how you look in terms of skill. What matters is how you perform. Right? And this is why, like, I don't typically get angry at fighting games, right? I have, especially like Fairy and Granblue, I'll never forget that. I will never, ever say I don't get angry at fighting games because of fucking Fairy. That character gave me gray hairs. At the end of the day, when you start thinking about how other people interpret your skill or like your level, you end up ruining, one, the game for yourself long term, and two, you end up just making it way less enjoyable for you to just interact with people. Again, fighting games are supposed to be interacting, improving as a group, right? That's like the end game goal. The problem with a lot of people is they get to this certain point where they may think like, oh, if I, let's say like if I ask, let's say I'm an Eno player and I'm like, Daliafong, tell me how do I mix Potemkin or some shit like that. Some people won't do that even though they have no clue. And it blocks their improvement because they just didn't ask a question. Because they're like, well, it may make me look like, well, they don't think like this, but some people will hesitate to ask those things because they'll be like, well, I don't know, you know, I don't know what, I don't want to look bad, or I don't want to look like I don't know. I don't want people to think like, oh, I have less skill because I don't get it. Fighting games, I've used this analogy a lot. It's like school. It's like subjects in school. Right? Some people are good at math, some are good at science, some good at, I don't know, fucking computers. I don't know. They're just good at writing, reading, history, like anything, right? But at the end of the day, you have a subject or subjects you are going to be excelling in. There's going to be areas where you don't excel in them, right? Like some people like playing neutral, some people like playing offense, some people like defending, right? A lot of people that complain a lot will not actually look into counterplay guides, right? Like SageAm's released a few, SQ's released one, Hatashi has released one. They've all released counterplay guides that are kind of relevant, right? That are good to understand. And a lot of people who complain about the same shit or like don't know what to deal with, they just don't watch it because they don't care, right? They just want an answer that's no work. That's how a lot of people are, honestly. And I know that sounds kind of boomer of me. When it comes to like being a student, it means you have to really be realistic with what you're hearing. You have to be realistic with how you can adjust for that, right? You have to be realistic for how you can adapt and change these things. My father once said that your life doesn't really start until you're 30. I thought that was woke as a fuck. Like, he was like, 20s are like for you to figure out this shit. And I was like, what is this shit? And you know what I realized? What I'm talking about right now, this is all this shit. You're still very young. You're not even close to middle age. There's a lot of stuff to figure out, and I still didn't figure out a lot of stuff until I was like, you know, early, like 25. Really, 25 was when I really started to figure out both myself and how I like to view things. I mean, I'm still 25, but I'm almost 26. You demonize the concept of getting old, but getting old is, I think we demonize it because we have a lot of preconceived notions on what being old is. Like, especially like if you grew up in this generation, a lot of people are like, oh, you'll grow out of video games, or you'll grow out of whatever, right? It's kind of funny because like in Guilty Gear, a lot of the strong players are like, they've been playing since like 2004, right? So a lot of them are like late 30s, early 40s. Some are mid 40s. I think like Kazuki is like 46 or something. If Ogawa can like retweet anime porn and like do all this shit playing gacha games at 46, shit, the world is your oyster. This is kind of what I mean. It's very important to like step away and like really assess yourself and think like, you know, where am I? Where is my ego flaring up, right? Everyone has an ego, right? And it doesn't necessarily mean ego is bad, but a lot of the time for improving, it typically is, right? I think the only time egos really like help you, especially as in tournaments, right? Like if you get like washed in tournament, like a lot of people will be like, oh my god, like I can't lose to this dork again, I'm gonna fuck them up next time. It's important to keep your ego in check, and like, you know, a lot of people, like there's a lot of layers to this, right? Like again, like not just like in here, but like, you know, some people may not want to give props because it makes them feel invalidated, or it makes them feel worse for some reason, right? Like, oh, like maybe like if I say they're really good, it may mean that I am a worse player or something, right? Like something like that, right? There's not a lot of logic to it. You have to remember that like egos don't really make a ton of sense. It's just to preserve how good you feel. But there's nothing wrong with it. And again, like I've told this story a ton, but one thing I really hated before was like someone would say, oh, this person's good because they beat Dev, and I hated that shit. I was like fuck you, you never beat me, even though they did beat me. Like I just like lash out or get upset, right? Well, I wouldn't lash out, but I would get upset. And I realized, I think like that sort of thing, someone is saying, yeah, this person's good because they could beat Deb, right? That's a fucking compliment, right? That is a good compliment. If you are the basis, if you're the benchmark for what makes somebody good, that's praise, right? Even though it is like, it's still something that's like at your expense, right? Like obviously it brings up that you lost to them, but you did lose to them. So like, it's not like you want to like wipe the history books. You don't want to give excuses for it, you know what I mean? Like figuring out strategies does come from kind of being open about it, and like the fact that you are not perfect, no matter how much you want people to believe it. And I mention it lightly, but like a lot of people care a lot, especially in like mid-level players that stream or like may have like some like standout performances. They may feel like, because like, you know, going from not doing so well to having like expectations on you may end up being like kind of stressful, and they don't want people's opinion to change them. A lot of people do live for the fact that in fighting games you can get recognized and be a strong player, and you know, people will say like, oh yeah, this person's like one of the best or something like that. Living for other people's expectations is a problem because this assumes that you and them have the same viewpoint. Now, here's an example I give a lot. Take off the glasses. These sort of expectations, they are natural, but they are also not healthy, and recognizing that is important. It's important to maintain your goals and play for what makes you happy and like what feels best for you, you know what I mean? Playing for yourself and what you feel like you can improve from, and accepting that, you may not do well all the time. That's okay. You don't need to do well all the time. You don't need to be perfect, right? You're perfect just being yourself and learning from your mistakes. That was kind of cheesy, but you get the point.